Great team. We have actually 3 user groups in Chicago, so it's a very active crowd. We had some difficulty with the resolution, so I'm going to start off with a small two-minute demo, and then I'm going to go into the formal presentation. So I want to show you what most people think of whenever they say the word responsive design. And this is from a fellow that started it all. His name is Ethan Marcotte, and this was in middle of 2010. He, on a list apart, did a blog entry, and he described this website, and he put it up as a responsive website. And so what happens when you have a responsive website is when you resize the viewport, things happen. So first of all, you see here the images are getting smaller. The text is moving around, so that's what's happening. And then something happens right here, and that's called a breakpoint. And what that signifies is the designer decided to break the design into a different design. He made the images bigger and put them on 2 rows. He moves the menu from on top to the left. So that's a breakpoint. If you make them continue making the viewport smaller, the images get smaller, text flows around, and then another breakpoint, something moves around, so something is happening. And then as you get smaller and smaller, so this design was the original version of an example of a responsive website. Now hopefully I won't have any issues with going to another resolution, and we can get started. Wonderful. As I said, I'm Dennis Kmetz from Taylor Bruce, Chicago. If you're ever in Chicago, look us up. We have a very active set of groups, and we have 3 meetings a month, very active community. I'm going to go through a demo, which you've seen already, and then I'm going to go through a little history of responsive design and the definition, and it's evolved over the last, since early 2010, when it first came out. And it's still evolving, and there's still a journey that we're on as far as what responsive design can do for us. Then I'm going to get into adaptive layouts and what they are. So if you're a designer, the first part will be more for you, and if you're a developer, the second half will be more for you. And since we're at Joomla, I'll get just a touch on some of my favorite Joomla templates for responsive design. Can I just see by a show of hands how many would call themselves a developer versus a designer? So how many folks are designers and developers? It looks about 50-50, so this is good. So let's get on. So the demo is what you've seen. It was from the fellow that sort of created the buzzword responsive design. And there are others. If you go to Boston Globe, that's where Ethan Marcotte currently works. You'll see a great website, Boston Globe. There's many others, and by the way, these slides will be available after the presentation, and at the bottom of each slide I have the reference for the information on that slide, where you can get into more depth on each of the slides. And then there's Media Queries, which just has a ton of different examples. So what you saw was, you saw this design, and then you saw it at different breakpoints. You saw it. You saw things moving around. You saw things disappearing and not being shown at all. So, what is responsive design? My friends at Head On London came up with this definition of responsive design, and I agree with it. And so I'm going to walk you through what my definition and their definition is. You've heard the term adaptive layout, And what you've seen was a layout adapting to different viewport sizes. So most folks think that a responsive design is an adaptive layout. And I think it's more. So what more could it be? And so as we go through this presentation, you'll find out what more I think it is. But let's start with adaptive layouts. What do? Well, they enable the development of designs that adapt to various viewport sizes. And with the screen sizes, now on HD screens sitting on a desktop being as cheap as $400, we're getting huge viewport sizes. So we're seeing small viewports not only on small devices, but on huge devices where we have multiple tasks going on the desktop. So adaptive layouts become more important with that consideration that they're being used on devices that you might not expect them to be used on. The fellow that started it all, May of 2010, the groundswell started earlier, but he sort of put it all together with his definition and that demo that you saw. So Ethan Marcotte, he said, responsive design is accomplished with 3 methods: CSS media queries, a flexible layout, and you may know them as fluid grids, elastic layouts. You know, there's a lot of nomenclature. They're all talking about the concept that it's all relative and things move around. And then, of course, flexible images. You saw the images actually getting smaller before they moved around and then getting larger. So that was technically what he described as responsive design. And then he sort of hinted that there's a little bit more to it. And that's where things have evolved from the middle of 2010. But what he hinted was, he quoted 2 folks, Fox and Kemp, who published a book called Interactive Architecture. And they talked about responsive design and interactive architecture as being a multi-loop system, a continual information exchange between 2 things, between the environment and the content. And it says, rather than creating immutable, unchangeable spaces that define a particular experience, they suggested that the inhabitant and the structure can and should mutually influence each other. And from building, so they were architects, and they actually had in a room where if you went up to a wall, the wall would actually move or change color depending on how you interacted with the room. So the concept is not foreign, and it's even being implemented in some of the buildings that are being built today in architecture. So this is the original design, the original thought of what the responsive design is. Ethan said, he's hinted that it's more of a philosophy and a strategy. So in his book, In the List Apart, which, by the way, is still a good reference, he said, most importantly, responsive web design isn't intended to serve as a replacement for mobile websites. And he says he believes it's 1 part philosophy and 1 part front-end development strategy. We'll get more into what that means. But as a development strategy, it's meant to be evaluated and see if it works, if it meets the needs on the project that you're working on. So you may not have 1 design for all viewport sizes. You may have maybe 2 or 3. We usually do 2, or if we have, a customer that's willing to pay for it, more. We usually have a mobile design, and then we have, I'll call it a desktop design. And then the desktop design is what you've seen up there, and the mobile would be different content. So, and as we're going through this, remember that there's content that is being sized and hidden through CSS media queries, but really sometimes you don't want to see that content at all. You don't want to see those large images. And so responsive design really doesn't talk about that, but I'll show you at the end there is an extension that I like called Mobile Joomla, and it actually gets you into downloading of the content that you want so that you don't have the bandwidth to worry about on a small bandwidth device. So responsive design is basically massaging the content that you have to work with. So fast forward 6 months, early January 2010, philosophically speaking, a lot of people wanted to weigh in on what they thought responsive design should be, what it is, what it isn't. And basically, one speaker was Marcotte. And he said responsive design should respond to the environment. It's intelligent, is designed in, and is responsive to the environment. Now he talks about things that you see, he talks about slag roll, but more relevant, I think, is your car. Your car responds to the environment. You're driving, all of a sudden the windshield wipers come on, or the lights come on, or the radio volume goes up and down. So you're worrying about driving, and you don't realize that because of the environment, your device, your car, is responding to the environment. And it's making your experience of driving safer, more pleasurable, and so on. Responsive design should then respond to the environment. He also said it should connect the technology to the environment. And he talks about the fact that we've lost connectiveness to our environment on a fundamental level. And the examples he gives is the Egyptians and the British. The Egyptians used measurements of yards and cubits. The British used, cubits and digits. The British used yards and inches. And so what are those? They're based upon the human anatomy. So on a fundamental level, their measurements were based on something they saw in nature. And then the French came along and they said, well, we want this metric system. What's it based on? It's based on mathematics. It's a great system, but from a designer perspective, it's not based on anything we see in nature. And so at a fundamental level, we've lost some connectivity to our environment. And we need to replace that now in our thinking when we design websites. And the last thing he says that the content should be bound to the device. And the example, so what's that mean? So the example he gave was that the monks came up with these divine proportions, divine ratios. They have canons of page construction. And their device, what was their device? Their device was a book. That was their device. And so they bound their content to that device. They came up with the best way of laying out content, the ratios, divine ratios, and so forth. So that concept is something that we need to keep in mind. So responsive design is nothing new. With those three examples. Products adapt to our needs. Technology monitors local environments to adjust the lighting, the temperature, even our physical spaces, that interactive architecture. Human technology connection, it started with the monks, the technology, the book, the content, the layout. As designers, we were taught that we have control. Control is a good thing. We can control how our designs will look. We have to change our way of thinking. We have to realize that we're not in control anymore. In fact, that's a good thing. All right, so we have to embrace the fact that things are going to be reflowed. So the concept, the takeaway here is to embrace the reflow. Mark came up with a respond, connect, bind that I went through, and basically for responding, since there are no edges on the web page, you design the grid. You have your layout size based upon content, and if you don't have any content, make up some of your own constraints. So, for example, you might have images from that you have taken on photo shoots that you want to have at a certain aspect ratio. If you don't, so you have something to work with, and you use that to pick your grid size or your overall proportions for your design. If you don't have any, then use your own grid size and come up with your own set of constraints. But what you're going to be doing is you're going to be designing from the content out, not the canvas in. So it's a different way of thinking. Content out. Start with the content, and that rules your design. As far as connecting, you create a feeling of connectiveness. Things should relate to other things. So that's why we use relevant measurements in our designs as opposed to fixed. things should scale and remain connected, remain proportional to how we design them. And that's that influence going back to the Egyptians and early history with our measurement system. And third, to create a connectedness between the worlds and between the words and the device. Use media queries and responsive design techniques and embrace reflow. You don't have control anymore. So those are the three concepts: to connect, to respond, connect, and bind. Content out, create connectedness, and bind the content to the device. Adaptive layouts. Currently we're changing the layouts based upon screen size, but we're capable of much, much more. So we have, our technology gives us the ability to know the screen size and some of the device capabilities. But in the future, think about what we could do if we knew the context. Somewhere I read that most people use their iPads at home, or a large number use them at home, on their couch, and so on and so forth. And so if we can take that context and bring it into our world, that would be a benefit to us. We can do that we can tell what, if you're on a T4 or a G4 or G3 internet connection, or home-based internet connection. But the content based on context is what we're trying to figure out. So, for example, I read somewhere that there was a lady, I might get this a little bit wrong, it was purchasing stuff at Target. And I believe it was her husband realized, her father realized that she was pregnant based upon what she was purchasing. And this was like 8 months before the child was due. So based upon the context of her purchasing decisions, a whole lot of information can be drawn. So imagine, so this is where we're evolving to as far as being able to respond to the content. Responsive web design currently changes the layout based on the environment. Will grow into a practice of changing the experience because of the environment. We will change content, layout, behavior, perception, even brands might change. If you're an automobile manufacturer, depending upon what the person's context is, you may show him a sequence of cars in a different sequence. All these things are open for change. So think responsively. Respond, content out, not canvas in. Connect, use relative measurements. Bind, embrace, reflow. So what is responsive design? Adaptive layout, but it's more. Before we get to that, Jeffrey Seldman, he's fast forward another 6 months, now we're into mid-2011. He said our understanding of responsive design should be broadened to cover any approach that delivers elegant visual experiences, regardless of the size of the user's displays and the limitations or capabilities of the device. So the thinking is now pretty much accepted in the community that it's more than just the adaptive design. A couple other folks. Finally, we're not designing sheets of paper that happen to be on the screen. I'd love us to rethink things on a more holistic manner, thinking everything, taking everything into consideration. But for now, Dribble.com lets us take a small step towards a responsive design by crafting an adaptive style sheet. So a lot of us see, we don't have the bandwidth to create an entirely new website, so we put a responsive style sheet on an existing website, and that's a step forward, but it's not the complete picture, according to Dan. Adaptive web design, progressive enhancement. This time of the evolution, mid-2011, you came out with a lot of terms: progressive enhancement, graceful degradation. It's just fancy words for where you're starting from. You're starting, glass half full, glass half empty. Jared, the key to understanding progressive enhancement or graceful degradation lies with understanding where your starting point is. Continue believing that adaptive web design refers more to the secondary and less fluid approach of adapting existing web designs or designing for controlled adaptation as opposed to a truly fluid and flexible responsive design. So pretty much the industry is all in sync. So what is responsive design? Adaptive layout and we'll keep you guessing a few more slides. But where do you start? Holistic approach, progressive enhancement, fluid grid.
Content.
That's the right answer. And we'll get to it in a second. Luke says you start with mobile first. So the thinking is that in just a half a day of brainstorming about your mobile experience can open up new ways of thinking about your product. With responsive web design, you can set a baseline experience first and then progressively enhance or adapt your layout as device capabilities change. And you have people like Kevin from CTO of Adobe had said we need to really shift now to start thinking about building mobile first. This is even a bigger shift, I guess for him, than the PC revolution. So it's a different way of thinking. Bang simple, designing mobile first forced us to strip down to the essentials. We're just now starting to think about mobile first and desktop second for all of our products on Facebook. So designing by mobile first, it forces you to know your customers whether you like it or not. So know your customers and their business, and designing for just the essence of what they want to see on a website, it gets you that trade-off. And it's not only you, but I mean you're going to create, say a mobile website first, and you're going to give it to them for their approval, and they're going to have discussion on that, and they're going to say, no, this is more important for our business. This is more important for the business. So you as a designer are, you're by doing the design for the mobile first, you're flushing out that conversation, so they know what their most important content is on a website. So the big, what is it? It's adaptive design plus content strategy, plus more, but we're going to get into what content strategy is real quick. What is content? It's anything that conveys information, audio, icons, logons, buttons, text, images, graphics, social media, video. All disciplines are responsible for content. Brand managers, developers, designers, copywriters, user experience folks, and online marketers. Developers? Why would a developer be interested in content? Well, think about the images. You're going to have them optimized. That's just one example. Basically, it takes a village sort of concept when you're talking about responsive design. Harmony through collaboration on message copy, on brand design. There are no requirements for pixel perfection across platforms. So now we're thinking about content is malleable, and it can move around, and it can be different on different browsers perhaps, which we've all experienced to our dismay in the past, but on different devices. And that's a good thing. And the thing is to create the right content to serve the right user needs. Our friend Jeffrey Zeldman, any approach that delivers elegant visual experiences. Remember to think cross-device instead of just mobile. So when we design responsively from a content perspective, we create content blocks that allow you to build a network of content that can be rearranged on any screen size to best convey the image. And the tools that we have to work with are flexible grids, fluid images, and media queries. So our third definition of what, in addition to adaptive layout, content strategy, user experience. Great. User experience. Dan from Kicker Studios says, it's what a customer perceives while engaged with your product. It's a way of looking at a product holistically. You don't care how it's made. You look at everything that's involved in the product. That's the user experience. Jared's goal. User experience, just one thing, whether or not your design is intuitive. The average designer doesn't spend any time watching people use the things they design. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but he also said that if you have a design, if you take it and show it to 2 or 3 other people in your shop that haven't been involved in it, and just watch them, you'll get 80 to 90% of the bugs or the user experience issues out of it, as opposed to going to focus groups and spending a lot of money on it. So if you think of a design as a type of art, as a designer as a type of artist, their medium is actually the behavior of the user. That's pretty cool stuff. So as a designer now, a good designer creates behaviors. So responsive design then is adaptive layout, content strategy, and that user experience. Most of the information I got from this presentation, I got out of these 2 books. It got me started and interested in responsive design. And I'm just curious, I'm wondering how many folks here subscribe to either of these on a regular basis? 1, 2. Look at them. They're a little expensive, but they're very, very, they're my Bible. I can't wait for it to arrive, and I read it cover to cover. These are just 2 that they highlighted responsive design on. As far as the process goes, real quick, on is that Madham indicated that we've learned that it's totally unrealistic to make Photoshop visuals for every single breakpoint in the design. It's better to have a strong idea of the direction you want to go to, and then just design the breakpoints in CSS as you build. It's all about tweaking until it feels right. And so expect a little bit more of tweaking than you would in a fixed design. So we talked about responsive design, and now I'm going to sort of, from a designer's perspective, now I'm going to sort of switch to a developer's perspective and go into a little bit more of the technology behind the implementation of adaptive layouts. Remember, adaptive layouts are done with CSS3 media queries, flexible layouts, and the flexible images. By the way, how am I doing on time?
30 minutes.
Huh?
You are in 30 minutes?
30 minutes more? Yep.
You are in 30 minutes.
CSS3 media queries, what are they? Well, I think everybody's familiar with CSS 2.1 media types. You know, that's where it said, and you had them either in a link or in an import, and they said things like, you know, type is equal to print, type is equal to all. So that's the media type. So the media query is just that, and there's actually an and there, other stuff. So the other stuff are these expressions that check for the conditions of a particular media feature. So you have expressions that check for screen size, device size, screen orientation, aspect ratio, and the shorthand that you can use is media all, and then you put in whatever you're looking for. Media only screen. So for an iPad, there's one sort of gotcha, and it's also, I'll touch on this, but there's a pixel, there's a device pixel ratio of 2. Let me talk about that later on. But for an Retina iPad high definition, this is what you're looking at as far as determining it in a media query. So the media queries allow detection of the width, height, orientation, aspect ratio, and there are also scripts available to detect on jQuery and JavaScript. And if you go to respondjs.com, you'll see a lot of the scripts. CSS2, again, media query, and the CSS3 usage examples. Pretty much self-evident, and you can read on it. The thing I want to point out here is the last statement down here. It's not a media query, it's a meta tag. In 2007, when the iPhone first came out, it became a standard, and you'll see that on the next slide. But the meta tag helps you. It says content width equals device width, and that's setting the device width and what you use as in your CSS width to be the same. And I'll show you more in a second what that means. It's available in all modern browsers. If you don't have a modern browser, you can look at Respond.js, and also Google has a set of nice media queries for CSS3 modern browsers. So this is what I was talking about. When the iPhone first came out, Apple wanted you to see the entire web page, and the only way they could do that is they would make their device override your width statements. And so you would see the entire page and you'd scroll through it, and that sort of became the accepted standard. So the way to get around that is with this meta statement here, and you for the viewport, and you set the width to be the device width, and then the width statements that you use in your CSS will work for the iPhones and other vendors that do a similar thing. So if you find out that your CSS breakpoints aren't working on iPhones, remember the meta tag. Common media queries. You can Google these. I mean, there's plenty of information out there. That's media queries. Flexible layout, also known as fluid grids, liquid grids, elastic layouts, are all talking about the same thing. So what's that mean? Let's start with grid systems. A grid system is a consistent system for the placement of content. It works on two levels. The first level is the unit or the cell, and the second level is the combining of those cells into a column or several columns. Consistently implemented, it says I'm told that it increases the user's confidence for what that's worth. Some tools that if you're working with grids you may be familiar with are the 960.gs and the cssgrid.net. And there's also a custom one that I have there that I found interesting. So the two levels that I spoke of, so there's a cell, it's 60, and when I combine it, two cells together, it takes that space into consideration. So that's one column of 60, but two columns isn't 120, it's 140, so it's the two cells plus the additional. So grid systems, this is a 12-column grid, there's your 12 columns. And there's a confident grid, and there's an insecure grid, just so you know what an insecure grid looks like. But line to grid, it's not a straitjacket. So when you're not sure where to begin with your user interface design, start by building a grid, and remember, you know, how many columns. Think about what assets, what images you have, and if you don't have any, then create your own grid constraints. And embrace the constraints of the grid in your design. And knowing when to break those constraints is a critical skill for designers. So mind the grid, but also it's not a straitjacket. Flexible grids use percentages for column lists, margins, paddings, and so forth. So you're going to see, instead of pixels, you're going to see percentages. For font sizes and line heights, you can use percentages. The industry says M's are better. And media queries, when flexible layouts break, And all grid systems will have breaking points, or they're going to break where the content just doesn't get readable, or and that's called breaking point, and that's what you've seen before. Apply different CSS to change the layout of each of the breakpoints. So you may have, like 3 or 4 breakpoints. That's what we're talking about. You may have 2 designs, one for mobile, one for desktop. How do you go about creating a flexible grid? If you start with your 960 grid, say that's 80% of your viewport, by 2200, 200 becomes 50%, 20%, 20%. How do you get there? Very simple. It's by you start with a container and you set it in pixels. So, for example, the container is 960, and you specify columns as percentages using the formula. So any target is relative to the context. So, for example, the 200 pixel inside of a 960 pixel context, you just divide the target by the context. That's 200 divided by 960, and that's your percentage. And does that percentage look kind of weird? It's 4 decimal points. And just a note, you're going to be working with decimal points when you work with percentages, because 1 pixel on say a 1024 screen, that is 0.0977. And so don't be afraid if you're going to move something 1 pixel over. If you're working with percentages, you're going to be moving it over small amounts of percentages. It's just something to keep in mind. Converting it to relative measurements as far as fonts and line heights go, change them from pixels to ems. So, for example, font size of 24 pixels becomes font size of 1.5 ems. So it's 24 pixels divided by 16 is 1.5. 14 divided by 16 is 0.875. 12 divided by 16, and so forth. Why am I using 16?
Standard browser.
Standard browser size. That's the default. That's the style sheet that's in your browser, 16. So it's pretty simple. Just take out your calculator and don't forget to use the percentages. And if you don't have a calculator, there's tools, online tools. Pix2M is a great tool, and this starts out here with that set. So the way this works is you pick things in this column, and then this is your answer in this column. So if your standard browser gives you 16 pixels, 1M, 100%, 12 point, that's your standard browser. Before I did anything, this showed me all that. But I can choose, say that I'm talking about, a website is using 10 pixels. Well, what does that mean? That's I would use this column here to read off that that's now becoming my value in ems. And then if you want to do conversions that are on this chart, you can use the custom conversion. Good tool, Pixel 2 ems. Another one is resize my browser, and basically the way this works is you go to a URL and you pick one of these, and you get a pop-up, and it shows you that URL in one of these dimensions. Just a quick and easy way to see what your design looks like. Remember I showed this up front? Well, how did I do that? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 breakpoints. Nice little website here. There's the URL up on top, and so the first step to getting to that second step, which you just saw, is you populate this here, and I think it has what you see here is the default, and you can add additional rows, and then you click the generate button, and it creates a bookmark for you. You take that bookmark and you drag it up to your browser's bookmark bar, and you have it forever and ever on every website. As far as the testing tool, responsivepx.com, it's a tool for responsive design testing. Remy Sharp created it. You enter your URL to the site, whether it's local or online. Use the controls to adjust the viewport width and height, and you find the breakpoints in pixels and use that information in your media queries. Just a nice little tool. So we talked about media queries, flexible layouts, and the last thing is on the technology side is flexible images. As far as images go, you want to size them to the width of their container. And you can do that with the background size, except for the non-standard browsers, i.e. 987, and there's a JavaScript that comes along with that. IE 9.js gets 9 and everything below that. And then that's for IE. For all other browsers, for your images, not your background images, but your images, you would use a max width of 100%. And then that fills the container that the image lives in, which is going to be some percentages of the container that it lives in, and so on and so forth. For background, there's a new CSS3 background size of cover, contain, and you can also put in horizontal and vertical dimensions. So you could put in 100%, 100%. Cover, make sure that the container is covered. Contain means that, so when it's covered, you might lose some of your image. Contain means that it's going to be contained in there, and you might see what you see on your TV set where you have those bars on the right or right and left or top and bottom. And then 3 scripts that stretch things as far as background images or images, or jQuery backstretch, supersized. And my favorite is VG Stretcher 2 at ajaxblender.com. I say it's my favorite. It's just a little bit more easy to work with, and there's no JavaScript conflicts with other JavaScripts, whereas the others, they're a little bit more intrusive. If you're using some of the CSS3 new rules and you're not sure if you want to use it, if you don't know about caniuse.com, you should. You basically search for the rule that you're looking for, and it gives you a long laundry list of, where it can be used, whether it's supported, partially supported, and most important, you may not know about is the resources. So there's a demo that shows you how to use it, and also a tutorial. And so these 2 URLs for each of the CSS3 media queries, tremendous resource. So that's sort of responsive design, adaptive layouts, content strategy, and user experience. We're a Joomla organization. Most of the template vendors by now have this. The very first one was Joomla Bamboo, and it just so happens I personally like Joomla Bamboo, so that's my personal opinion. So that's my favorite. But if you go to the template route, they're all responsive nowadays. And then remember I said that CSS3 or CSS media queries are just hiding the content that you have to work with. Well, there's this extension here that I love. It's called mobilejoomla.com. And the folks at Mobile Joomla basically look at the device, and it allows you via modules that they have to display or not display your content. And so that you don't even have to download the content. And so it's a more efficient way to only have the content that you really want to have on that specific device. And for those who like Joomla Bamboo, my friend Anthony from Joomla Bamboo is gracious enough to give us 25% off. There's a discount code that's called Chicago Bamboo, because I'm from Chicago. And he's made that available, and it does not expire.